In this video, I'm going to break down what dyslexia is, my experience with it and diagnosis, and how this so-called disadvantage is actually a huge advantage in my life, with the hopes that anybody watching this with dyslexia or who want to be a bit more informed go away understanding how this can actually be a huge advantage for someone who has dyslexia. So this week I actually found my report from when I was diagnosed on 2nd of September 2014. That was 7 years ago. I was 21. I was in my final year of university. But the thing is, I knew I had had dyslexia my whole life. It just was apparent from a young age, but for whatever reason, I wasn't tested. The only reason I actually got tested at university is because I heard if you were dyslexic, they gave you a grant and you got a free MacBook out of it. And I was like, I want a free MacBook. They put me in for the test, and that was when I was officially diagnosed with dyslexia. So let's just get the basics out of the way first for the people who are here and they just want an explanation of what dyslexia is. Dyslexia is a brain-based condition that primarily affects the skills in spelling, reading, and writing. It's a learning difficulty rather than a disability. Characteristic features of dyslexia are difficulties in memorizing things, retrieving information, how you sequence numbers, and phonological awareness, which is the ability to recognize and work with sounds in language.
Phonological.
Literally part of dyslexia itself. Phonological. Why do they make these words so hard? But anyway, dyslexics literally think differently. We have a different wiring of the brain, which means we're really good at certain things, like coming up with creative ideas and solutions, but find it challenging to do other things like more traditional education and learning. Okay, so let's look at my brain for a second. The left side of your brain, or the left hemisphere, is in charge of languages, and the right typically handles more spatial activities. fMRI studies have shown people with dyslexia tend to rely more on the right hemisphere of the brain, so when dissecting languages, it takes a longer trip through our brain. Another way to think about it, and I'm going to put a travel spin on this, the average student gets from A to B pretty quickly, as if they were taking the motorway. But a dyslexic student will take the scenic route. It may take them a bit longer, but think about all the incredible things that they will see along the way. 5 to 10% of the population experience dyslexia, which means that's around 700 million people worldwide that have dyslexia. It has a tendency of running in families. Now, let me be clear here. Dyslexia has nothing to do with intelligence. A common misconception about people who have dyslexia is people think that they see letters backwards, like B as D or saw as was. But it's not a problem with seeing language, it's a problem with manipulating it. Hey, Editor Andy here from the future. I've been trying to think how to depict dyslexia to people who don't have it. And I've been looking online and reading what some academics have put, and I think I can demonstrate it with a book. Yeah, I've got a few. Okay, take a second to read some of this text. Was it frustrating, slow, hard to decipher? And that's kind of what it's like to be dyslexic. Reading at that pace, sometimes rereading sentences to gain the full context. It's a slow and laborious process and mentally draining. People with dyslexia are able to think more creatively, more laterally, and more differently, which is a huge advantage in the real world. And we'll get onto that in a bit. But where it can be a big disadvantage is in the educational system if it's not picked up and recognized early. If children aren't given the right support at a young age, all those things that we mentioned before can be held against them. If unaware, teachers may think, well, that kid is just slacking off. Definitely had school reports that were like, gets distracted easily was the line all the time. And that comes across as he's not doing well or he's not good at this, which is not the case. When you're a kid, you have so much imagination, and our educational system, at least here in the UK, is so obsessed with conformity and measurement. They're not there to nurture creativity or innovation or all the things that people with dyslexia thrive at. All of this creativity is just educated out of them. If you don't fit this way, then sorry, but you're just not right for our school, which is completely wrong. And a major point that I want to touch on that I've heard from a lot of people is they can just then go through life thinking that they're a bit stupid because they don't know that they have dyslexia. I think in turn, if it can be picked up early and they can have the right support, you can focus on these kids' strengths and help them succeed.
Thank you and good afternoon. This is Sam Vaughn for Sam Sports Report. We have a podcast today on dyslexia and famous people with dyslexia. Also kick it off with my story. We'll start with this person though. On the story, Andy was 21. He knew he had dyslexia, but he wanted a laptop, and so that's what he took the test for. I hope there were a lot more reasons than that to get diagnosed with dyslexia. Otherwise, system, you let that decide. People with dyslexia struggle with handwriting and reading, comprehension, remembering things, retrieving information. Dyslexia may become with creative ideas. Hint the podcast. Since there was nothing to do in COVID in 2020, I said to myself, so I have to come up with an idea. And I came up with this idea of a podcast, all on my own. I had studied radio for only about a year, so nothing this complicated had I done. I had written a few scripts and done a podcast, edited them up, but never actually posted them until March of 2020. I sent my podcast off to Kevin and Nancy, mom and dad. The whole thing started from there. My first podcast wasn't good. It took me about 12 hours to edit it. At the same time, I used something called WavePad. Just found it on my computer, and that's how I figured out what it was called. There was not much to talk about in sports. I did have to come up with a topic every day. And it was coming off a Chiefs Super Bowl, so that made it a little easier because they were under a long delay in sports. I had to come up with my own topics. I don't know when I did my first mental health podcast or learning disability podcast. Anyways, back to the brain. The reading, math, language, and science. That's the left side of the brain is in charge of the left side. More spatial issues is the side of the left side. I have problems with both. 5 to 10% people experience dyslexia. About 700 million. Dyslexia has nothing to do with intelligence. As you see from this video, dyslexia may mix up B's and D's from words and can be hard to read, much like in the video showed in the book. Definitely, back to my podcast, a lot of people do podcasts, yes, but they don't do them on sports and mental health or disabilities. Lack of effort can be brought up when people have dyslexia. This can also be brought up when you have ADHD, which is subject we just started talking about on Monday. One of the 4 next topics, ADHD. When your kids maybe looked at it, it's okay to have a good imagination in elementary. Later on, took it out of them. A lot of academics is a measuring scale. Think about it. In school and college and middle school, into anywhere, you're graded off what you did. A, 90 to 100, B, 80 to 90, C, 70 to 60, and what happens would things change for the better or for the worse? If there was no grades, I think there could be an answer for both. In the video, he says the creative is the educated part. Last part's on my counselor, who knew a guy named Greg, and he has been a great tutor, and this is how it all started. And Adobe, from WavePad to Adobe to iMovie, all of them have been good skills. WavePad taught me how to edit at all. Adobe taught me how to do it more professionally. And iMovie, well, I pretty much already knew that. Other news, former NFL quarterback Ryan Mallett dies in an apparent drowning injury in the Gulf of Mexico. Mallett played for the University of Michigan for one season before transferring to Arkansas, where he had passed for 7,493 yards and 62 touchdowns in 2 seasons. As a redshirt sophomore in 2009, under coach Bob Petrino, the Razorbacks to an 8-5 record and win in the Liberty Bowl, for which he was earned MVP offensive honors. The New England Patriots selected Mallett in the 3rd round of 74 of 2011. Coach Bill Belichick explained at the time that the team could have never have enough depth at quarterback, which led to selecting Mallett as one of the Tom Brady's backup. Mallett was just 35 years old.